Soon after its establishment, the Sikh Foundation immersed itself in literary pursuits, publishing books and journals. But the course of history, set in motion in the Punjab in the 80s, engulfed all academic and artistic ambitions for now. The weekly newspaper, the Sikh Times, was launched in 1984. Full-page advertisements in leading American newspapers were published to educate Americans about Sikhs. Pioneering the display of Sikh arts, the first Sikh art exhibit opened in 1992 in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. Another major initiative was the establishment of the Kundan Kaur Kapani Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Language Studies, the first of its kind at the University of California, Santa Barbara, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Sikh Foundation. The first permanent Sikh art gallery was established at the Asian Art Museums in San Francisco in 2003. In all, 7 Sikh art exhibits supported by the Foundation have been displayed at leading museums all over the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Smithsonian in DC, Rubin Museum of Art in New York, and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. 3 chairs of Sikh studies set up by the Sikh Foundation at University of California campuses at Santa Barbara, Riverside, and Santa Cruz, and a Sikh studies program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley are amongst the 6 endowed chairs and numerous programs running all over the United States with the support from the community. These chairs and programs create an enduring legacy, educating generations of students. With increasing number of scholars of Sikh studies, the field has expanded from religion and history to also include economics, conservation, and art. Continuing in our mission to create high-quality resources for the academic and artistic study of Sikhism, our latest publication, Sikh Arts from the Kapani Collection, co-published with the Smithsonian Institute, documents this unrivaled collection of art. As we look to the future, we think about new ways to maintain our connection with our past heritage so that our future generations can also be inspired, engaged, and educated all over the world.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Sat Sri Akal, hello, and welcome to the final episode in our virtual series by Sikh Foundation International, exploring Sikh treasures around the world. I'm Taran Singh from Birmingham, UK, and it is my pleasure to present this episode today. Sonia Dhamiji continues to be busy with her November schedule, and we are missing her greatly, but rest assured she will be back in the new year with a new fantastic program of events for 2021. We started this journey in April this year with a 3-part series learning about the wealth of Sikh treasures found in London, UK, with my lovely friend Rav Singh from A Little History of the Sikhs. We then moved to the Indian subcontinent with presentations from an array of historians, academics, and researchers presenting fascinating accounts of Sikh treasures in Pakistan and India. In addition to this, we also had a walkthrough of the Kapani collection with our very own Sonia Dhamiji. Following on from our last episode, where we were exploring Sikh history in Spain and Morocco, in this, our final episode, Rav Singh will present a virtual tour of Sikh history in towns and cities across the Republic of France. In this tour, we will visit Saint Tropez, Monte Carlo, Versailles, Neuve Chapelle, and Paris, and learn about links in France to generals of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Dalip Singh family, treasures and artifacts from the Sikh Empire in Paris, and we will also learn of Amrita Shergill, an artist who trained in Paris and made it to the heights of the art world. We hope to spend about an hour and a quarter with you today. After that, we'll be able to take feedback and questions from you, which you can send to us through the Facebook chat window. Most of the images that you will be sharing today are also available for viewing on our app, the Sikh Foundation International, on the iOS App Store. All we now ask of you is if you could please share this live session by clicking the share button on your screens. It will help us to connect with your friends and families so that they too can join and see and learn about the amazing heritage on the tour ahead. So please do click the share button right now. So with that introduction and request, it's time to start to bring alive Sikh history in France and introduce Rav Singh, who's joining us from London today. Over to you, Rav.
Right, Guru, so let's share the screen. Screen one, share. Okay, so you should see my screen. We'll do that, and I'm ready. So thank you, Taran, for that introduction. We are now on our final episode. Have I got my screen share on, Taran? Is it working? It's just you and I think.
Yes, that's fine.
Is it working on the screen? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's working perfectly.
Good. Thank you very much, Taran. Right, so we are on episode 12, a journey that has taken us from the start of lockdown 1 to nearly the end of lockdown 2 in London here. As Taran said, we started in London, we've been to the Indian subcontinent, and we've started to explore a little history in Europe. So my last episode with you is on the streets of Paris and cities in France, and the relationship between the Sikhs and the French, which spans approximately 2 centuries now. So, bienvenue à Paris. J'espère. No, I'm going to say, no, I was going to try a bit of French, but let's say, no, we will. En explorant le lien avec les Sikhs dans la ville en France, because I was hoping we would have some French people with us today, and I will just keep dropping in my little bit of French in these slides. Okay, so let's get started. Here we are. So next slide, please. Paris. This is the most famous icon related to France, known all over the world as the Eiffel Tower. Now, for a little history, we visit cities and towns, we explore little histories. And for me, our kind of blueprint is that the past is always alive if it is remembered. That knowledge has life and power as long as it is saved from human forgetfulness. So these connections we build is just to try and keep our past alive. It's there, we visit, we see, we look at the items, and we try and remember it, and that can help us guide us in our future. So we are in Paris now. So let's explore. This episode I've done in 7 parts, and we have enough time, so I'm just going to go through them. In the first part, we're going to look at a gentleman by the name of General Allard and Banu Pandey. And I'm going to take you through a book, and this book is called Le Magasin Pittoresque. Le Magasin Pittoresque, it was published in 1836. For those of you who were on our London tour, we looked at our illustrated London news, and they were reporting on the Kingdom of Punjab. Le Magasin Pittoresque was being published at the height of the Sikh Empire during the times of Ranjit Singh, and we're going to start looking at some of the individuals that were involved who are reporting back. The 1836 edition, which I think was the annual number 4 for this magazine, was published in Paris here. And the first page of that magazine showed this. And this is one of the copies that I keep retained behind me here. And it shows Maharaja Ranjit Singh, a portrait taken from a miniature by Jeevan Ram of Delhi. And it's dated 1836. Now, the interesting thing about this magazine is they're quite thick volumes. I have got a few with me, but in those volumes, there is a lot of detail about Punjab and France. It's not just images. I think the first 3 pages are describing the royal court. And as we'll go through this presentation, I'll take you back to some of the other images. And in its glory, this is the image of Maharaja Ranjit Singh on the first page. And you'll see him with an array of jewelry. I think he is wearing the Kohinoor. Definitely he is wearing the Kohinoor, and it looks like he's wearing it on his left arm there. And it's quite a very nice sketch to open that volume with. I don't want to tell you about the other items just yet, but I will soon. Okay, so next slide. On the next few pages of that, it's around these gentlemen. Now, if we look at the war with the French and the English, the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon was defeated by the British in the early 1800s, and his generals, who were very, very strategic and qualified and could take on the might of the British, although they lost this war in the Napoleonic Wars, they, after that time, were basically mercenaries. They were looking for work, and they started to head towards the east. And these two generals of Napoleon were called Jean-Francois Allard and Jean-Baptiste Ventura. So General Allard and General Ventura. And in 1822, they were like veterans from the Imperial Guard of Emperor Napoleon. And these two friends reached Lahore, the capital city of Punjab. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh asked them to kind of take on the modernization of his army. And actually, we have this special brigade of Maharaja Ranjit Singh called the Fauj-e-Khas. And in 1826, this Fauj-e-Khas, the special brigade, they had about 10,000 men in 4 infantry divisions. And the general for that was General Allard. Now, I'm just going to take you to another page in this magazine. So if you go back to Le Magasin Picturesque, this is an image of General Allard, and it starts to talk about his views of, or his observations of Punjab in this magazine. And it's also said things like Maharaja Ranjit Singh asked him to grow his beard, which looks very splendid in this image here. He's wearing his French beret, but he is maintaining a full beard to fit in with the army that he was commanding. And they did fight in Afghanistan and Peshawar. I'm just going to take you to the next picture. So let's look at this painting. And actually, Maharaja Ranjit Singh asked General Allard, or introduced General Allard, to marry a lady here by the name of Bannu Pandey. So Bannu Pandey and General Allard were married in 1826. From records that I'm trying to make out in French, I think they had 7 children, but 5 survived. So two did not. 2 died quite early in their lives. So 5 children, and they lived in this stunning residence in Anarkali Gardens in Lahore. And General Allard started to kind of protect artists and support handicraft trade between France and Kashmir. And he was passionate about archaeology and India's history. Now, he remained in Punjab until the end of his life, and he died in Punjab in 1839. He's buried in Lahore. And we'll focus on his wife in a little bit, but this is Bannu Pandey in a portrait on the right. And this is her with 1, 2, 3, 4 children in this image. But I think from my French in those magazines, I can make out 5 children in these stunning gardens they lived. Now, towards the end of his time in Punjab, this is a letter from a book by Dr. Jean-Marie Lafont. And in that book, they've got a copy of a letter from Louis Philippe, the King of the French, to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And here they've appointed General Allard as an agent de France to the Punjab. And this is dated the 27th of October, 1935. And if we look carefully here, you can see Ranjit Singh of Punjab, Bahadur of Punjab. And this is Louis Philippe, Emperor of France, all in gold on the side. So this is a formal letter with a seal charted to 1830. And this was in the Dosha Khana of the Lahore fort, but now it's kept at the British Museum in London after the British annexed the kingdom. But that's quite interesting. So you begins to see about the French-Punjab relationship. Now, Allard, although he died in Punjab, he sent his family back to Saint-Tropez, and I think he did come back to Saint-Tropez. And in Saint-Tropez, which is on the south, very tip of the south of France, a very splendid location, as much of the south of France is on the Mediterranean coast. They're very proud of their connections with the Punjab and General Allard, and we'll look through some of those items now. But if I go to the next slide, there is a statue of Allard in Allard Square. So this statue has been there for a long time of General Allard, Jean-Francois Allard. And in the photo on the right, what you'll see a gentleman by the name of Henry Prevost Allard. So H.P. Allard, I think, is commonly referred to, Henri Prevost. And Dr. Jean-Marie Lafont there with his wife in this photograph. This is around September 2016, but this statue of Allard has always been in Allard Square. Now, just a little bit about Allard and his life. He learnt Punjabi, so he could talk to his soldiers. He married Bannu Bandai, but he sent her to France because I think after what he saw with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, he feared that she would commit sati if he died in battle, with all the wars that he was fighting for Ranjit Singh and leading the four Jikhas. So he had sent Bannu Bandai to Saint-Tropez. He settled her there, and he told them not to speak in French. And he said it's like speak their mother tongue. So what they used to do is speak in Farsi and Punjabi, and then she learnt French, and they used to have this code way of talking to each other and through their letters, which were in French. Now, Henri Prevost, I think he's like deputy mayor of Saint-Tropez, and he's in charge of tourism. So it was based on his work that he worked with the Sikh community in France. And in 2016, actually, I'm going to take you to something else first. Let me take you to this slide. So this is, again, Allard, related to Allard. On the left-hand side with Henri Prevost, they're actually at the Maritime Cemetery in Saint-Tropez. And this is where the resting place currently, where Bannu Bandai is buried. So you have a Indian or princess from Jumba, Hindu princess from Jumba under the Sikh Empire, buried in Saint-Tropez in France. But General Allard himself, who passed away in 1839, he's buried according to his wishes, which in Lahore. And this is the cemetery in Lahore where he's buried. And this, I think, was researched and found and then restored by Jean-Marie Lafont and Henri Prevost. So they have a link to Lahore when Jean-Marie was writing his book, and then Henri as a descendant of Allard, and they worked together and did this in Lahore. And on the left-hand side, his wife is buried in Saint-Tropez. So what happened in 2016 is Henri Prevost, because he was the deputy mayor of Saint-Tropez in charge of tourism, he worked with Ranjit Goraya Singh, and I'll tell you about Ranjit later on. He's a representative of Sikhs de France, the Sikh Council of France, and they worked together. They collaborated with officials in Punjab, and they installed this next to General Allard's statue, which was always there. In 2016, they installed a statue of Bannu Bandai, and this is their residence. So when she was settled, I think this is a 12-bedroom, very luxurious house. And currently, it's now called Pandey Palais. So Pandey Palais in Saint-Tropez, which is now a hotel, a luxury hotel, boutique hotel. Bannu Bandai is memorialized in the square next to General Allard, and their house is named Pandey Palace. And you can actually stay there, and when you visit Saint-Tropez. And also in 2016, to build these links between France and Punjab, they installed a statue of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So this was unveiled in 2016 on the 17th of September. And I think this Sikh group is from France. And every year now, so 2017, I'm told they had a service, but they have a memorial, 2016, 2018, 2019, to build on the friendship between the French and the Sikh Empire of Punjab. And I'll just show you a few other photos. Now this one is in 2018. So this is Ranjit Goraya Singh, and if in the middle photo there, and if anyone follows Sikhs in France, you will have seen him recently. He was appointed as a deputy mayor in Paris. So Henri Provost is a deputy mayor in Saint-Tropez, and Ranjit Goraya Singh is a deputy mayor in Paris now, which is a fantastic, I think, achievement given the struggles that the Sikh community have in France with keeping their Sikh identity. So really, at all of these events, a friend of mine now from the walking tours, Amrik Singh Bara, very kindly gave me all of these photos, which I think are fabulous because you can't find them to this quality on Google. So the statue of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, together with a service that takes place every year in Saint-Tropez in Allard Square. So you have 3 busts, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, General Allard, and Bannu Pandey. And every year they have a service, and this was the 2019 service, and they have the Sikhs, I think, from Italy last year doing Gatka and the Ardas here to memorialize the history between Punjab and France. Very good. Right, so that's part 1. Okay, I'm doing okay for time. Let's move on. So the next bit I wanted to bring up was the swords and shamshirs from the 19th century. So in this part, we're going to look at some of these swords. Now, this battle we spoke about between the French and the British, it's the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815, near Waterloo, which is in Belgium, which at that time was part of the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. Now, there was a French army from Napoleon, so this is Napoleon on the left, and he was defeated. And his sword here was later given to a gentleman called, here we go. So this sword here was given to General Harding. And General Harding was in the Franco-Indian alliance, no, sorry. He was in the Anglo-Sikh Wars. So what I'm going to do next is just show you. So as you saw in my first and third ones, and we had Taran introducing the show, I'm going to try and link this to a 3D model, and let's see if it works. Yes, brilliant, good. You can see it on the screen, and this is the work that Taran does, which we all find is amazing. So he has worked with Gurinder Singh Maan on the Anglo-Sikh Virtual Museum, and that very sword of Napoleon's, which ended up in the Anglo-Sikh Wars with Harding's sword, is there in 3D on the Anglo-Sikh Museum website. So you can zoom in. Kids love this kind of stuff. So you can zoom in and you can see all the detail. I'm not going to keep playing around with it, although I do think it's great. Let me see. Well, I'm trying to get to the handle here. I'll zoom out. Yeah, so this is where you see all of it. So this is available on your phone. You just need to go to anglosikhmuseum.com. I'm going to turn that one off, or turn that small. So you see the website there, anglosikhmuseum.com relics. It tells you that the sword bears the maker's mark of Martin Guillaume Baynas, goldsmith to Emperor Napoleon. It is said to have been taken by the Duke of Wellington at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and then it reached General Harding, who fought in the Anglo-Sikh Wars, and that's the connection. So I'm just going to move on. And when we looked last time, we looked at this gentleman who did the Wallace collection. So he was always in Paris. He was brought up in Paris, and he amassed a huge art collection, which is now kept in London, in Hertford House in Manchester Square. And if any of you are following us closely on this one, you'll see that they keep the shamshirs of Maharaja Ranjit Singh here. But he acquired one of the greatest Sikh treasures in Britain in Paris around 1865. And it was an exhibition called the Musée Retrospectif in 1865. And the shamshir of Maharaja Ranjit Singh was on display. And it is now kept in London, just near Selfridges. If you're in Selfridges on Oxford Street, you just come out to the main entrance, turn left, walk down a little bit, turn left again, and you're into this kind of area where Manchester Square is close by. And you will see the Shamshir of Maharaja Ranjit Singh kept in London. And this is described as one of the greatest Sikh treasures in the UK, but acquired in Paris in 1865. We're going to stick with swords. Oh, and this is the sword in all its glory by Lord Hertford. And as we said, it was the Museum Retrospectif, 1865 in Paris. And this is more of a ceremonial sword, you know, so all the gilding we saw here, all of the detailing of the Lion of Punjab with the motifs here and the gold shamshir with the Wootz blade. Okay, just carrying on. I'm going to stick to exhibitions in Paris because they had lots of exhibitions. So lots of items used to appear given the close links between France and Punjab. There were many items here. I'm going to move on to this one here. So this was called the World Fair Exhibition. It took place on the 1st of May to the 10th of November, 1878. And so you remember we had the Great Exhibition of 1851 in the UK. We talk about that because of the Koh-i-Noor was presented in that exhibition. But in this exhibition, the Exposition Universelle in 1878, it celebrated the kind of recovery of France after their war with Prussia. And in this exhibition, interestingly, they put on display the head of the Statue of Liberty, and then it was sent over to New York to the American people after the exhibition. But during this exhibition, they had a section on India, and they had a section with items from Punjab. So this would have been within that great exhibition hall, there would have been a section on India. And within that section was on display this item. And this is a very interesting item. I'm going to try and bring this up again back in 3D if I can, but I can't. I will try this way. Let's try this way. Because this, if we look closely, this is a khanda, but it's also a pistol. Can you see? So there's a pistol with bullets together with a khanda, and it makes a sound, so it can be used as a khanda. So all these ball bearings will make a whoosh noise. And you will also get this exquisite detailing. And again, I mean, I'm probably not doing justice to the sword at the moment, but you can do what I'm doing on the screen, you can do at home from your phone. I'll just give you the link again, but this is called a khanda pistol, a Sikh khanda with a pistol, put on display at that exhibition. I could just play around this for ages, but I'm going to stop now. I'll stop there. Bring it back. So it says, before 1879, the original location, Patiala, procured from the Paris Universelle Exhibition of 1878 after advice from the Victoria and Albert Museum. But today, it's kept in Nottingham in the UK. So although it was acquired, the Nottingham Museum Service, the Castle Museum and Art Gallery, bought the khanda pistol, and it's now housed in the UK. I think Taran and Gurinder Singh Maan, they went to Nottingham. They were able to take detailed photographs of it, and Taran was able to recreate this 3D model, which if you go to anglosikhmuseum.com/relics, you will be able to see this for yourself and play around with it. Let's move on. Okay, so that was part 2. Staying on Paris, I'm going to talk a little now about Dalip Singh and his family in France. So this is a painting by the Singh twins. It's a mixed media painting called Maharaja Dalip Singh at Sunset. And you can see this on their website. I'm not sure where that is on display, but if any of the Singh twins, I know they watched the last show, but if they're on the show, they'll comment if that's on display anywhere. Otherwise, you can see it through their website, but it's kind of mixed media. So here you can see Dalip Singh wearing the Koh-i-Noor. He has a pendant, which is interestingly, it's not Queen Victoria. So I'll get the detail on that. Another ruby on his right, together with all of the jewelry on his dastar. But I like this one. It's got Lahore in the background as well. You can easily recognize Lahore, which is the samadhi of his father, it looks like on the back there, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So Dalip Singh we have covered in many of our previous lectures, and obviously strong connections to the UK. But at the time of his passing, he was here at the Rue de La Trémoille on the 8th, I think it's at arrondissement in Paris. So some people who can now Google, they can usually find that somehow they end up near here. This is the hotel, which some time ago, there it is there, that Maharaja Dalip Singh actually died in, and his body was then brought by his family to Elvedon for burial. But at the time of his demise, it's the 8th arrondissement, I think it is. I've forgotten what the road name is for that. I need to look it up. But it's number 8. So if you're in Paris, it all kind of goes around the center, and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's the Rue de La Trémoille. And that's where Dalip Singh passed away. Now there are restaurants, Indian restaurants opposite. And I think my cousin, Sunny, he took these photos for me when he went to Paris, and he went inside, and the concierge was very aware that since the film, The Black Prince, a lot of people have been trying to work out which room, and they do visit and they do ask them. So they are aware, but they don't know the room number apparently. So that might be one for Peter Bance to work out for us and let us know. So why good? I'm going to move. Interestingly, now that I've got links with Ranjit Goraya Singh, who you saw earlier, when I was just QAing some of these slides with him, he sent me this, and he was like, Rav, you could mention this as well. This is the death certificate of Dalip Singh. And so the hotel room at the time, the road, and look here, on the 22nd of October, 1893, in Paris, in France, son of Ranjit Singh and Jindan, husband of Bamba Miller, and then Ada Douglas Wetherall. And it will say the death certificate of Maharaja, there is Dalip Singh. On the 22nd of October, obviously, because he died in Paris. So Ranjit also sent me the wedding certificate where it says Sovereign de Sikhs when he married Ada. But I was still trying to work out my French to see if that wedding took place in France. So I'm not sure, but I put the death certificate in here for you to see. So that was a nice touch. Staying in France, we're going to move to one of his sons, his eldest son, Prince Victor Dalip Singh. Now, Prince Victor, you may have remembered from our episode 2 on churches in London, where we looked at the marriage of Dalip Singh Victor Dalip Singh and his childhood sweetheart from university, Lady Anne of Coventry, Lady Anne Blanche. They married at St. Peter's Church in Eaton Square in 1898. And Victor, I think he spent a lot of time, let's just say he spent a lot of time gambling away his father's heirlooms, and he had serious financial issues. Although he was friends with King Edward who was later to become King Edward VII, and he went to Trinity College. It was probably one of the first mixed race marriages involving the royal family. And that's a photograph there. You see Lady Anne wearing jewelry from Lahore, and that's them in later life. But both of them are buried in France, and they're buried in an area called Monte Carlo. Now, Monte Carlo, it was an area which I looked up all of this. Why is it so famous? Because really most of Europe was governed in line with Catholicism. They believed that gambling was a sin. But with all these wars that were taking place between the French and other countries, the ruling family of Monaco kind of decided that they would allow gambling to take place to try and help the recovery of this small principality in Monaco. So Monte Carlo became like the gambling capital of Europe, and people like Victor Dalip Singh would end up there with other princes and royals because they were allowed to gamble there. Now, this is the Anglican cemetery above Monte Carlo. And it is here that you will see, oh, these are just some other pictures from there. So it's a beautiful church, and then surrounded with graves that overlook the Mediterranean. But here you see, this was another QA. This is Bobby Singil on the far right of that photo. And he shared some of these photos with me earlier in the summer, which I was aware that the grave was there, but I didn't have such high quality photos at all. And I'm so grateful that he sent them to me. But look, Prince Victor Dalip Singh is buried with his wife here. Look, so it says Anne Blanche Alice, who died in 1956, and Prince Victor, who died in June 1918. So they're buried in Monte Carlo in Monaco. So it's quite close to the south of France. Sorry, Saint-Tropez, Nice. So it's all in a line. If anyone did want to do a tour, I think I might swap them from the north of France to the south of France, because it's sunnier, definitely. So no, thank you to Bobby for these photos. But again, look, they're both buried here, Monte Carlo. Okay, moving on. So where I normally take my tour groups to France is to the north. And in the north of France, we look at the battlefields of World War I. And World War I took place from 28th of July 1914 through to the 11th of November, which we call Remembrance Sunday now, Remembrance Day in 1918. And the last few years, we've been reflecting on 100 years of the start of World War I, and then the 100 years of the end of World War I, and now we're up to nearly 102 years this year. So it was a significant point, as I've said here, political, cultural, economic, social climate of the world. The big four nations imposed their terms on the defeated powers in a series of treaties, but really you started to see the demise of the Austro-Hungarian, German, Ottoman, Russian empires, and new states created. And all these borders keep continuing to change. But I think everyone was kind of interested in empire building before that time. And they weren't really ready for war. And when they realized they needed lots and lots of numbers, lots of people to fight in this war, they reached out, especially Britain, they reached out to the Dominions and the Commonwealth nations and the empire. And if we say that the war started in July, by August, I think Britain joined, and the Indian expedition forces, the Sikhs in World War I, started to arrive from the 26th of September 1914. Now this is the south of France in Marseille, and you'll see Sikh regiments in Indian expedition forces. There were obviously other regiments as well, but the postcards seem to always feature a lot of Sikh regiments, and you can easily spot the Sikhs. Now here they're coming, look, it says, the musicians Hindu, the armies of India. And within, the Indian Corps came as well here, all the kind of the logistics and troops, and they arrived dressed in something called khaki drill. Now, khaki drill is like a lightweight tropical material, and it's not kind of best placed to suit for winter. Now, look, it's late September here. Temperatures are getting colder. And it was only really months later that they were fitted out with more suitable British Army battle dress, heavy serge material. In the early days, they just came in light khaki drill, tropical temperatures, and this really did affect morale of Indian troops on the front line, because you're living in trenches, you're fighting in battles, and it's noted it's kind of a lack of foresight by the British High Command, to bring all these troops from India and to put them in the midst of winter in Northern Europe in attire that is totally unsuitable. And if I just take you to some examples, it says here, this is just one letter. So letters were allowed. So when you're recovering from your injuries, and they were recovering in places like hospitals on the south coast of England because they were close to France. Just read this one. It says, the Sikhs did not turn even their noses. They were keen for the fight, and where one man fell, another from behind stood in his place. And it says, we took pleasure in the battle, Until now, God has preserved us, but there is no hope of anyone of us returning to India. This is no war, but the destruction of the world. Now, I have some videos of the battlefield tours, but I didn't put them into this presentation. But let's move on. So this is from the hospital. So they were allowed to write from the hospital, but again, they used to use code words. But the interesting part is postcards from the trenches. So if you were in a trench, you were allowed these options, and you would just delete what's not applicable, and then you would basically just send a note back with a signature and a date to tell your family you're basically still alive. So this gentleman, so an English postcard I've got in my collection, says, "I am quite well," signed and dated. "I received your letter dated the 21st. Now this is the Hindi equivalent for the field service for India. And I think when I was going through this earlier in the week, I can't read Hindi, to be honest. So I was relying on my wife to tell me what this meant, and it does mean the same things. But a friend of mine, Dr. Tejpal Singh Ralmild, he gave me the Gurmukhi version, which I didn't even know existed, you know. So this might be a little bit easier to read, because it says, "Tariq ar dastakat de siva is pur hor kuch likhan da hukam nahi hai." So you are not allowed to put anything other than the date and your signature. And it says, "Main Raji," this is Raji Baji, huh? I'm okay. Or you're bimar or zakmi, injured. Menno bes page na han. Yes. Menno bes what the page they han. Don't know. Menno to haddi chitti milli hai. Menno to haddi tar milli hai, telegram. Parcel milli hai. Menno to haddi parcel milli hai. It's interesting. And then your dastakat and your tariq. So this is, look, it says in Gurmukhi. So a Gurmukhi postcard from the trenches. So when these soldiers were amidst battle, and just to kind of write home and say, we are alive, you know, we continue to be alive. Look, they've got a Gurmukhi version of the postcard. So that's a real find for me, because I've never seen one in Gurmukhi before. But I thank you, Dr. Tejpal Singh, for passing that on to me recently. Excellent, right. But if we are talking about postcards from the trenches, I did want to bring the next one up, because this is quite an interesting one. This is a letter, the exchange between a family and their father. And the sepoy is Seva Singh, who was one of the 23rd Sikh pioneers. He was serving in Sinai and Palestine, also against the Ottoman Turks. And Kishan Devi was his daughter, from a Punjabi Sikh background, and she had only recently learnt to read and write. This postcard is postmarked the 7th of February, 1916. It was on display in an exhibition here in London, in Walthamstow. And I really wanted to weave this into the presentation, because when we do our tours to northern France, I think it's impossible for us to comprehend, you know, how conditions were. And this is the only known exchange to a soldier at the front line in Gurmukhi. It has been translated. So it's owned by a friend of mine now, but a friend of mine for many years. It's owned by Avtar Singh Bara. And the translation here was done by Baljinder Singh and Sukhdeep Jodha. So this is the original in Gurmukhi, and they've been through this in detail. And it actually says this, and this it's quite a difficult read sometimes, but let's try it. It says, "Ik Onkar Satgur Prasad," which is one creator, preserver, and destroyer, known throughout the true Guru's grace. This is Kishan Devi writing to you. So she's in Punjab. "Here all is well. Dear Father, best wishes to you. With God's grace, your letter has arrived. We came to know your situation. With the sight of your letter, I felt at peace." It says, "Dear Father, Mother says you can write your innermost thoughts to us. I will read the letter. We do not rely on anyone else to read the letters. Father, all your letters from you will be read by me." She says, "I do not fight with anyone. My heart is yours. You are my everything, and I worry about you. Without you, I am like a living dead. I am unable to live like this, even though you give me a lot of assurance." It says, "Mother bows to you with clasps with hands clasped. Dear Father, please take leave and come to meet us. Please do come. We repeat again and again. Reply to our letter soon. So it takes you back to how it could have been, right? They're thousands of miles away from home in Northern Europe in the midst of winter. And it's this kind of communication which brings it alive, really. So there is a Facebook website, Gishan Devi Postcards. You can follow it on Facebook. You can see where it appears in London or other places. And there is a story that goes with it. It was also part of the Imperial War Museum's 100th Centenary exhibition. So it's on that website as well, which is where I think I picked this up from. And thank you to Avtar for permission always to allow me to drop this into our presentations. But rather than focus on each of the battles, I tried to bring the kind of human side of it. So Bastille Day 1916, so at the end of the war. And this is a very famous image. I think this is from the Tour collection, the original image, although you see it on the internet a lot, mostly not credited to Devinder Tour. But here you see a French lady and she's pinning a flower in a gesture of thanks on Sikh saviors of France in Paris in 1916 during Bastille Day, which is interesting. We've got a story to go with that one. Okay, so the next part of the presentation, that was part 4, I think, after the Dilip Singhs. And we're going to move to the next part, Sikh royalty in Paris. Sikh royalty and Paris. So here, what we'll see is Cartier. Now, Cartier is the jeweler of kings and the king of jewelers. It's a French luxury goods conglomerate, right? They design, manufacture, distribute and sell jewelry and watches. It's regarded as the most prestigious jewelry manufacturer in the world. It operates in more than 200 countries with 200 stores in 125 countries. And they have 3 headquarters, 3 temples, they call them. Their headquarters, Maçons, historical Masons. And they have their headquarters in London, New York, and Paris. So I think the one on the left, I had a nice photo. I think that's the London one, to be honest. But the one on the right is the Paris one. So from the outside, it's not as grand as the London one, because historically, it must have always been there for a long time. But inside, look how amazing Cartier is. Now, it was formed in 1847, and it stayed in family control until 1964. The headquarters is Paris, but today it's owned by not the Cartier family, it's owned by a Swiss company now. And it has a long history of sales to royalty, European royalty. As I said, the jeweler of kings and the king of jewelers. So let's have a look at some of their creations. Cartier. So this is Maharaja of Patiala Yadavendra Singh, and he had something called the Patiala necklace made by Cartier in 1928. So Yadavendra Singh's wearing it here, but it was commissioned by Bhupinder Singh, who was at the time the Maharaja of Patiala. I always get the numbers wrong here, but that's why I write them down. It contains 2,930 diamonds. So I think they just deposited the diamonds to Cartier from the Patiala treasury, and they just put them there. And it has the world's 7th largest diamond, the De Beers diamond, 428 carat diamond put here. And it contains 7 other large diamonds. So you see them all across the center. Half a mouse, yeah. So there's the De Beers, and it goes all across the 7 diamonds, ranging from 18 to 73 carat, with Burmese rubies dropped in. Now, the interesting thing for me here is if we go back to lecture 10 with Nadra-ji, Dr. Nadra Khan from Pakistan, she was talking about how the arts were not being patronized by the princes in the ruling families, because they were now being pensioned off by the British and traveling across Europe, and they were patronizing the likes of Cartier with their diamonds and their jewels and asking them to come up with these European fashionable accessories and adornments for their turbans, as you can see here, rather than the traditional skills of the jewelry that was created, which Maharaja Ranjit Singh had patronized in Punjab. So I think all these little stories start to connect together. Why is like her Patiala prince, commissioning work in Paris from Cartier, it's because the British had pensioned them off with lots and lots of money, and they had the jewelry anyway. So it was the Lahore Toshkhana, which was emptied by the British, and they took over, but these princely states were allowed to continue. So that's one of the items, but there's another item. And this one was again commissioned by Bhupinder Singh. This is 1931. This necklace is made in platinum, ruby, pearl, and diamonds. Again, Cartier. It's called the ruby choker. And I'm hoping I'm right with the name, because they always say the Maharani of Patiala, but I really wanted to find her name, because we know it's Maharaja Bhupinder Singh, but this is Bakhtavar Kaur Sahiba of Patiala, I think. I'm kind of sure. It's kind of like a 3-part necklace. So the top is a choker, and then the middle part, and then the bottom part. So the middle part is 6 layers, the top part is a choker, and then you have the design pattern at the bottom with diamonds encrusted all the way through. Now, the interesting thing is the Maharaja gifted it to his wife in 3 parts, and she's wearing it in this photograph in full glory. But then it was disbanded, the necklace, and then it appeared, I think they say it disappeared from the Patiala royal family. They don't know how it disappeared from the Patiala royal family, but it disappeared. And then elements of it started to come up in different areas. And one part of the choker came up in a Swiss art market, where it was placed as a bracelet. A lot of rubies were removed, but the only thing they say was intact was the Cartier signature. So Cartier repurchased it, and they have restored it. And the interesting thing about the Patiala necklace and this ruby choker is because they have been recreated by Cartier, they actually go on tour in Cartier stores. So you remember I said they had 200 stores in 125 countries. If you're in Milan or New York or Paris or a Cartier store, just pop your head in, because sometimes they have these on display, or they have them on display, but you might be lucky and see the Patiala necklace or the ruby choker from Patiala there on the stores. I still have yet to find it in London when we do our Sikh tours. Just moving on, this wasn't just the only one. I don't want to spend too much time on jewelry, but yes, there's loads and loads. Like Dr. Nadra Khan said a few weeks ago, you know, we are blessed that our skills managed to survive within Punjab, because all of the Maharajas and ruling princes were basically patronizing European jewelry houses. And if you look at Europe, it wasn't in a good way after World War I, and these jewelry houses with long tradition probably would not have survived if they were not patronized by the Indian and Punjab rulers of the time. So I think they know their history, but they don't really tell you about that part of it. So this one here in green, this is the Maharaja Kapurthala, this is the ruby choker, as we've just seen, this is the Patiala necklace, these are drawings of those. And this is another Raja from Navanagar. I think this is one here as well. But most of these ones are associated with Sikh kingdoms. Indian heirlooms revamped by Cartier. So they would just take their diamonds and deposit them at the jewelry houses, and then come back on the next tour and collect these exquisite items. Which brings us on to, when we were in tour 11, we were looking at Maharaja Jagatjit Singh. And when we had loads of time, I read out his full title, and that took about a minute. I'm not going to do that now, but yeah, I did forget to say that if you had a title like that, then yes, you would shorten your name to Jag, like we do in London. You know, so if you're Jagjit, you become Jag, but if you're Major General His Highness Pradhan Dilband Rashikar Dolad English Raja Rajagan, Maharaja Sir Jagjit Singh, Sahiba Bahadur, Maharaja Kapurthala, etc. I can understand why. But when we said last week he was 2 weeks ago, we said he was a Francophile, very French, recreated palaces, etc., which we'll look at. But he spent a lot of time in France, and he was very, very impressed with the Palace of Versailles. Now, the Palace of Versailles was the royal residence of France from 1682 under King Louis, and then up until the start of the French Revolution in 1789. So it's not too far from Paris. It's about 20 kilometers away from Paris. It's a stunning palace to go and see. And obviously the Maharaja of Kapurthala had spent a lot of time here, given his royal status. And the next slide, so inside, obviously, as you'd expect in France and anything to do with art, look at these painted ceilings, palaces. My mansard roof is back again on this palace. And then look at the whole grounds here. Amazing. If we just look at the gardens, these are the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. And they lead on like this. And for anyone who may be watching, unlikely, but maybe watching, who is connected to Kapurthala, they will see a very similar palace in Kapurthala, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago, called the Jagatjit Singh Palace. Now, this isn't modeled on the Palace of Versailles, but it is in a French style, but the gardens are modeled on the Palace of Versailles. So the gardens would have that structure. As you can see, I haven't got exact replica photos, but you can make a like for like. So the gardens in Kapurthala, Punjab of the Jagatjit Singh Palace were modeled on the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, interestingly enough. Now, for those who are from Kapurthala, and they will see various buildings, but Kapurthala, which was a small princely state in Punjab, is actually called the Paris of Punjab, because a lot of buildings have an Indo-French style of architecture, influenced by the French with elements of Indian architecture. And you can see a number of buildings there. We looked at the Moorish Mosque, which had Moroccan links, but I think this is the clubhouse, and this is another school, I think. But the main palace is now called the Sainik School. I'm not sure about the one on the right, but that's definitely a French style of architecture. So Kapurthala would be very interesting for Sikh tours, given how much links it has to France. Okay, so we're going to carry on time. I might whiz through this bit, but this is museums in Paris and France. I was going to go to the Musée d'Orsay, but I'm going to move quickly to Musée Jean de La Fontaine. So he was a writer, they call it a fabulist, a French fabulist. I don't know what a fabulist is, but he was dedicated to collections and objects representing Jean de La Fontaine's work. And the museum of the Jean de La Fontaine is Chateau Thierry. And this bust of Jean de La Fontaine is kept in the Louvre. But also in this museum are kept these pieces. Now, I'm just going to take you through these quickly, but this one is a Punjabi provincial town, and we're looking at a miller, his son, and they say his Lane. And this is 1837 to 1839. So this is kept at the Musée Jean de La Fontaine. And the next one is quite an interesting one. This one is a Punjabi provincial town, Les Deux Aventuriers et le Talisman. So you have two adventurers coming to a provincial town with, it might be their elephant. Again, these are all by Imam Baksh Lahori, and they were acquired and they are kept here in Chateau Thierry. And the last one, I think, from these collections, there are a few more, but this is Le Milan, Le Roi et le Chasseur, the Hawk, the King and the Falcon. Again, another scene of a Punjabi countryside now kept in Paris, which you can see in Chateau Thierry. But if we want to go back to the center of Paris, we're going to see the Musée Gimet, which is the Musée National des Arts Asiatiques. So Asian Art Museum. So the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, for me, was a great day, you know, because you can walk around there and you can see loads and loads of items. But they say this one, it's one of the largest collections abroad of Asian art, and this isn't far from the Eiffel Tower at all. Now, last year, you see the glorious kind of internal layout. I think that's the library inside, which must be in the center here. Last year, they had an exhibition, Fables de Orient, and it took place from February to May 2019. And this was an interesting piece from Punjab. But equally, in that exhibition, they were able to put on display their painting of Fulla Singh Akali, Fulla Singh Nahang, General de Akali, Fanatique Sikhs. Fanatique Sikhs. They used to call them fanatical Sikhs, the Akalis. Fanatical Sikhs. Fulla Singh Nahang. So this is a miniature painting, 163 by 244, so quite small. But this is in the Musée Guimet, and we can carry on, and you'll see some other miniatures. Prince Nau Nihal Singh, also, I think he was a grandson of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who died. It looks to have a very similar khanda to that we saw in the khanda pistol. No, but not the same one. This is just a khanda. Maharaja Dalip Singh, these are watercolors on European paper. Again, at that museum. I'll have to check if they're always on display, but during that exhibition, they had lots of these on display. I saw some photos and it was like lots of them, very nicely lit for you to go and see. Again, Raja Hira Singh on the left here, and the one on the right here, it shows a scene from the Darbar of Ranjit Singh in 8. So this was produced around 1841. So obviously he died in 1839. Okay, so we're doing okay for time. So this is my last part. I said part 7, but I'm not sure if it's part 6 or 7. So we're going to look, so if, for those who saw the poster, we're going to look at Amrita Shergill. Now her story is quite an interesting one. So her links to me really were more Hungarian, because her mother was a Hungarian opera singer. Her father was obviously from Punjab, Umrao Singh. So Sardar Umrao Singh Shergill or Majita. He was, so he was born in 1870, married Marie Antoinette Gottesman Baktay, a Hungarian opera singer in the center there. They married in 1912 and they left Lahore for Budapest, went to Hungary. After their marriage, their daughters were born, Amrita and Indra. Okay, so we're up to about the 1920s, early 1920s. So when they left Hungary and went to Paris in 1929, and Amrita at the time was 16 years old in 1929, so she was born then around 1913. So she was young, impressionable, and she had a passion for art, and she would spend 5 years of her life in a city which at that time was known as the Mecca of the art world, Paris. And they lived here. They lived in Rue de Bassano, number 11, and it's near the Champs-Élysées. And Marie Antoinette, because she was a Hungarian opera singer, she knew people in the kind of the artistic, literary and social structures of Paris. So she started doing what she liked to do best, and she started parties and socialized with high society. Now, Umrao, her father, he preferred to kind of sit in his study here at 11 Rue de Bassano and just research Sanskrit and Persian literature. So you can kind of see he was a learned fellow from the photograph on the left. And this is their residence. And there was a quote I found. It said, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best," is what Frida Kahlo said. I think that inspired a lot of what Amrita Kaur Shergill was about. Now, because her mother was mixing with artists, Amrita began to study French. Her mother already spoke fluent French, and she took her French language skills and her command of the French writing skills as well, because she could write fluently. And she was 16, remember, when she came, it was 1929, she was only 16. And she threw herself into kind of the social life of Paris. And she wanted her own friends around her own age, you know, and she discovered the Latin Quarter of Paris. You know, and if anyone knows the Latin Quarter of Paris, it's very dark, smoky cafes and studios. And I think the term seedy might be appropriate for that part. And because she was very young and because she had striking foreign appearance, she became like the center of attention as she strolled the streets of Bohemian Paris. So she transformed herself from this kind of shy, innocent girl to like an extroverted Amrita of Paris. Now, at one of these social gatherings her mother was organizing, the Hungarian painter Joseph Nemes took her under her wing and introduced her to this academy, the Grand Chaumière Art Institute, you know. And at that art institute was a professor, Pierre Valiant, and he was impressed with Amrita's ability at a young age, and he admitted her to this art institute. So she spent the first few months of her life there sketching models, but her drawing started to be very different to the other students. Now, I was listening to a lecture by Kanwar Dhaliwal from Pakistan this week. I don't know why, I think I just logged in, and he's part of the Young Historians Club. And he's definitely an artist, maybe an art historian or an artist. And he was saying in that lecture that all artists who are trained classically, they can all do classical art, but it's what they do that is new that propels them into the art world, you know. So they can do classical portraits. Just because Picasso does his style of work doesn't mean he cannot paint a traditional classical painting, which I thought was weird, because I thought it was kind of a God-given way they did it. But he said, no, when you train at these academies, they teach you all the skills. What you do from it makes your mark in the art world. So she was here, and she started to explore color, you know, explore color in her art. And the professor wasn't too supportive of the way she was veering from the traditional naturalism style, you know, and it caused a conflict in her relationship. And I think in October, it says of 1929, Amrita's work kind of ended at the institute, you know. And then she found herself here. So there was another painter, the one who introduced her, Nemes from Hungary. He'd been keeping an eye on her progress at the Grand Chaumière. And when he saw that she was having these conflicts with the people there, with the professor, he recommended that she enroll at the École Nationale de Beaux-Arts. It's the primary institute in Paris. And Amrita was introduced to Professor Lucien. He was a post-impressionist, and he was impressed with her work. You know, so she was underage for admittance because she was only 16, but she was allowed to join his studio. He had a liberal style of teaching, individual forms of self-expression, which were better suited to Amrita's style of art. And it was from Simon that Amrita learned to appreciate color. And basically at this institute, the École Nationale de Beaux-Arts, she stayed there for 3 years. She benefited greatly from Simon's direction. And he told her then that one day I shall be proud that you have been a pupil of mine. You know, so she created hundreds and hundreds of sketches in pencil and charcoal, mainly of male and female forms. And then she began to experiment in oil. And between 1930 and 1932, she produced 60 paintings, self-portraits, portraits, still lifes and landscapes, but mainly portraits and self-portraits. And every year she was there for those 3 years, she won the first prize for portraits and still lifes. And because her paintings were not the usual style of glamorous Parisian life, they were like, she chose to capture, because she had that kind of introduction to the Latin Quarter in Paris, she chose to capture like the sordid underside of the glamorized Parisian life. Now, given my kind of teaching style to a cross audience, I haven't put any of her other paintings in, but let's have a look at some of her paintings. So as I said, every year she was there, she won the first prize. So this is a painting whilst she was in Paris. And I think this is of her friend, and it's called The Lady in, a Model in Green. There it is, 1934. But the next painting is quite interesting, because this one, it's called Three Girls. And these 3 girls have now been given a name, you know, so they're 3 girls in Amrita's paintings. They're granddaughters of a land-owning politician, Sundar Singh Majithia, and they are actually her cousins. The sisters are Beant Kaur, Narvar Kaur, and Gurbhajan Kaur. And they were in their teens, and they were just a few years younger than Amrita when this painting, when they became the subject of this painting. Now, what happened is she went back from Paris. So in Paris, she was painting those models and those life forms in the kind of representing the seedy underside of Paris, and she was winning them medals. But then she came back to India. And when she came back to India, this was her painting that won her the gold medal at the Bombay Art Exhibition, Art Society in 1937. And that kind of paved her way to become the heart of India's art fraternity. And she became what we now say is the first lady of India's canvas. And she's influenced kind of generations and generations of modern art painters in India. This is another one of hers. Oh, look, I haven't put the medium and dimensions here, but an ancient storyteller, 1940. An artist is depicting an old man who is sitting at the front of 3 boys and telling them interesting stories. The female figure looks to be cooking food for the kids. This is another one of the paintings I liked. It's called Haldi Grinders, 1940. It's now in New Delhi. And this is quite interesting. This is from the Little History stamp collection. So Mozambique did a set of stamps on world famous artists, and they featured Amrita Shergill. And this is a stamp, features one of her landscape paintings. And then you have the 3 girls painting here, which I thought was quite interesting. There is a second set of stamps, which I have from a supplier in Russia, but they are mainly of her earlier self-portraits and sketch forms, which are probably not suitable for a family audience. So let's carry on. So that, ladies and gentlemen, on time is towards the end of our presentation. I just want to highlight the date and time that we have picked today on the 28th. It's just a couple of days ahead of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Prakash Utsav this year, which for everyone, it's going to be a different kind of celebration this year. And just on that note, I just wanted to go back to Le Magasin Picturesque, which is here, because they have lots of images in this publication. And I just wanted to highlight this image, because this is the first time that we had a picture of Harmandir Sahib in a European publication, which I thought was very interesting. And I just had some close-ups, because that's now the Parkarma, but it used to be the Palace of Amritsar. You're very close up there. You can see a whole mixture of people here attending. You can see the Akali Sikhs, the Sikhs with Garbans and people of other faith, all the activity leading up to the Harmandir Sahib. And even this part here, you can see all manner of different forms and faiths here. So I think that's quite interesting, but it was this one. So on Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Prakash Utsav 2020, I was just going to share with you the image of the Sikh gurus, which I think it has been recorded as the earliest, but I'd say amongst the earliest, but I think it is the earliest published in the Western press. So that's the first image of Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji in the Western press. So on that note, Taran, I think I'm up to 7:15, which is my hour and a quarter. I have not been following Facebook like usual because I've been focused on the screen.
Yeah, we've had some really great comments. If I'm allowed to read them out a bit. So we had Ignatius Xavier saying great stuff, and Lauren Goldstein, Sat Sri Akal from Paris. Sat Sri Akal,
that's
Lauren.
good. Oh, bonjour.
We've got Sajjan Singh who's the convener for Sikh Heritage Foundation Hyderabad Deccan. And he was saying, wonderful presentation, Rav Singh Ji. Thanks for enlightening us. We've had comments from Harkeet Singh. What an amazing story. Thank you to those who have shared to make this presentation so engaging. Gardo Anna saying this is very interesting and some of the stories are heartbreaking. Lily Swan saying interesting information and excellent photos from Harkeet Singh. Satinder Das Gupta saying did not know any of these links existed with France. So yeah, so we've got comments from everywhere, really good. We've got a question from Harkeet Singh. Actually, he's saying, how consistent is the information and history reported from a British and French perspective when it came to Maharaja Ranjit Singh? So how
that's
consistent
interesting.
is that information?
No, it is consistent, because I think what the French were doing, when they engaged with Maharaja Ranjit, they were writing their observations. So I've got lots of books in French, and it's talking about how ill you know, he was becoming in later life. He had gout issues, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, but also about the splendor of Punjab. Now, both covered that in their newspapers, you know, the splendor and the opportunities. They were trying to trade with Punjab. So that's consistent. But I think it's, if you want to really read the French, you need someone's French. It's a bit better than mine to be able to then do the comparisons, you know, because it is all in French, you know, and the French observations, which is good. And the British, obviously, we can concur with.
Great. We've had some Gurdas Tadwal saying great presentation, and Tejpal Singh Ralmil, who I believe was in your presentation. Great work to Rav and Taran. Thanks, Tejpal. And you know what, there's been a lot of buzz online actually about your background, what you've got in the back there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've built there? Because it looks fascinating.
So this is the little history kind of museum now. So this is all going to build up into a museum. It's in London, but in the back here, I've got some books which I put purposely there. I'll come on to, but I just wanted to get these thank yous in because, you know, this presentation was shorter and the depth of it came really from Amrik sending me his photos, introducing me to Ranjit, Bobby sending me his photos when I told him what I'm doing, of Tara laying the postcard, and Tejpal obviously. Sati and Jazzy always help me after the presentation because they convert these for YouTube. And today, obviously, with yourself and Gurinder with the 3D models, you know. So I did want to get those thank yous in. But I'm going to cover these books that I put on in the background in a second. But I would just say that this is, you know, we've had 12 episodes, you know. So we went from London. We went to Pakistan, went to India. We looked at the Kapani collection in the USA. Punjab again, we looked back at Lahore with colonial Punjab. We went to Spain and Morocco, which was kind of a new one for me, but I took you guys to Malaga, to Marrakesh, and today we finished in France, you know. But what's behind me is just a whole collection of little history items. We have postcards, coins, stamps, newspaper articles, artworks, and it's all just collected over time. So even on the walls, you know, so we keep loads of art pieces on the walls, models, and it is, you know, if anyone is in London, they're more than welcome to come and see the items. But I take these on the tours with me, and we take the coins and we show people, because sometimes the museums are closed, but we've managed to collect them. But I just wanted to say, I did mention Dr. Jean-Marie Lafont. This book, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Lord of the Five Rivers, that's where I got a lot of my, where is it located in which museums? And obviously, Bobby Singh Bansal's book really does cover General Allard and Jean-Baptiste Ventura, but a lot of the research, the original research, you know, hats off to Dr. Jean-Marie Lafont to find the graves in Lahore, etc., to link those through with Henri. And he's wrote the foreword for Bobby, so I'm sure they're close. And Dalip Singh's, it's always going to be, you know, Peter Vance is the go-to researcher for Dalip Singh's and the death of Dalip Singh in Paris. And obviously this new book, Sikh Art from the Kapani collection, will feature items from France as well. So that's just a little further reading from me, because that's what I keep in the background. Those books are there on display. And we just have a library, books, coins, stamps. And yes, it looks quite nice in the background, actually. So that's quite a nice little setup there. Thank you. Cool. So
great stuff.
That's it then.
Yeah, I think we'd just like to say from everyone at Sikh Foundation International, the Sevadars, everyone would like to say a big thank you to Rav Singh. Your credit to, you know, all the research and work that you've done, your passion comes across, you know, always. And it's been a great journey following these kind of tours across the world with you, being in lockdown. You know, we haven't been able to go anywhere, but this has been like a fascinating journey across the world with you. So I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Rav Singh.
No, thank you, Taran. And the last comments, I think when we go back, we started these tours in June when we had the issues in America with the Black Lives Matter, right? And I remember Sonia Ji putting a commentary at the end. Now, I don't really work in that space or that field, but you know, it feels like at the end of a journey now. Look, we're at the 28th of November, there's issues in Punjab. We've had a week of issues in England, you know, that the Sikh community are having to join together with other communities, you know, to challenge racism in the UK, which is with the young child in Telford, and the issues constantly today, which I've been on the TV about the farmers in Punjab. So it's just, you know, we've got Gurpurab coming up on Monday where we're not going to be able to spend time in the Gurdwara, you know, so maybe we can focus some of our energy on supporting our Sikh brothers and over in India and here in the UK. So that's how probably I'd like to end the episode, really, to say, let's see if we can help make a change.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in. And I think we'll finish there now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Vaheguru
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.